For most, especially those with children, Easter can be a special time of year, a chance for parents and grandparents to spoil the young ones, for families to come together, and for the kids to enjoy cracking open and devouring their chocolate eggs, something the parents often enthusiastically join in with, especially if they've been disciplined enough to give up chocolate for the whole of Lent. For those who, like myself, are of a Christian persuasion, Easter is a particularly joyous occasion, being as it is the biggest celebration in the Christian calendar and arguably the holiest day of the year. For those of other faiths or of no faith at all, Easter is still a special event, as it often corresponds with school breaks, bank holidays, and some well-deserved time off. At the very least, Easter signals the end of winter, the hope of renewal, and the welcome warmth and freshness of spring, or at least it does for most. For me, however, Easter is a time of mixed feelings. While I still enjoy celebrating, I can't deny that for me, this time of year is one that swirls with shadows, the half-formed ghosts of recurring memories that I have tried in vain to bury. It wasn't always like this. Having been a Catholic priest for almost 12 years, Easter used to be a time of year that I cherished. Though it was a busy period full of ritual and duty, it was also a time of great fun, as attendance at church increased and a number of parish events filled up the calendar. It was one of these events, the annual Easter egg hunt, that left me so bitterly scarred by this time of year. For those who don't know, an Easter egg hunt essentially involves all of the local children being given a small wicker basket and sent out into the woods, a garden, or the local playing field in search of chocolate eggs that have been concealed around it. The kids race from hedgerow to bush, from tree to root, scrabbling in recesses and investigating holes in search of a prize that will then pop into their basket. The quicker they get around the circuit and the more places they search, the more chocolate they end up collecting. It is something the kids look forward to, and a great opportunity to teach ideas like teamwork and sharing, as those who have collected far more than others volunteer to give away a few of their prizes to make the whole thing more equal. It was, in short, just a silly bit of fun, most of the time. The Easter egg hunt was a tradition in the village long before I came to the parish, and had been fun if the unremarkable event for almost as long as there had been a church in the area. The tradition, I was told, stretched back to a time when the kids searched for painted chicken eggs rather than chocolate ones, and were one of the longest-running annual events anywhere in the country. On the Easter of 1999, however, the annual egg hunt took on a far more sinister twist. Having only arrived in the parish just before the previous Christmas, I was keen to make an impression, and for that year's Easter egg hunt to be the biggest and most impressive ever, I got a small grant from the local council and from the diocese to advertise the event, decorate the chosen area, and make sure that the prizes were of really good quality. As a result, we ended up with far more children attending the event than in previous years, despite the naysayers who had sworn they would never attend any event that involved Acres Wood. When planning the event months earlier with a small committee of parishioners, through a series of horribly dull meetings, I had suggested that to make the whole thing more challenging and exciting for the kids, we should move the hunt from its usual venue to the school playing field, to somewhere better suitable. That way, instead of the children simply traipsing around in a circle, picking up easily found prizes, whilst the older and faster kids claimed most of the chocolate, the kids would have to actually search and rummage for them. If they had to actually go under logs and behind tree stumps to find the goodies, if they could retrieve prizes that the less observant might have missed, then the whole thing would be more of an actual hunt, and, I argued, far more memorable. At first, there was an enthusiastic agreement with this idea, and one or two of the more vocal parishioners praised me for shaking things up a bit. That enthusiasm disappeared quickly, however, when I mentioned that my proposed venue for this event was going to be a small clearing I had seen at the start of Acres Wood. Suddenly, the whole room became very quiet. Furtive glances were exchanged and muttered words hissed as people shook their heads in agreement that something which should not be mentioned had been referred to out loud. When I asked why there had been such a sudden change, the attendees were initially reluctant to speak up. Eventually, though, one old bloke named Charles was nominated by way of a few sharp-elbowed nudges to come forward and explain that Acres Wood would be an inappropriate venue for such an event, and that they couldn't possibly think of letting children play around there. When I asked why not, Charles bowed his head and explained that Acres Wood was the final resting place of a woman named Elizabeth Bell. According to Charles's somewhat garbled tale, she had been buried in the wood because the church had ruled she could not be buried on consecrated ground, by which he meant in the churchyard like everyone else in the village. When I asked why that might be the case, Charles paused before adding with an almost mournful solemnity that Elizabeth Bell was a witch. At this, I must confess, I laughed out loud. Probing a little more into the story, I found that not only had Elizabeth Bell been regarded as a witch, but she had also died and been buried at the entrance to Acres Wood almost 500 years ago. "Surely," I said with a smile, "you can't think that a woman who died 500 years ago can hurt you?" Again the muttered rumblings from the group, and again a hearty laugh from me. "Well," I remember saying, "that settles it then. We are definitely holding the event there, if only to dispel this stupid superstition once and for all. I think 500 years is long enough for one woman to hold a village in the grip of fear." I smiled at this and winked at one of the old women knowingly. Just think, I could be the priest who banished the witch from the town forever, and on Easter Sunday no less. The parishioners smiled politely, but I knew a few of them still had reservations, a fact that made me all the more determined to go ahead. On the day of the hunt, I welcomed everyone to the site, explained the rules, and thanked the sponsors for helping us organize such a marvelous event. It was a chilly spring morning, but with the yellow ribbons wound around the trees and the banners produced by the local school hanging from the opened gates, the entrance to Acres Wood looked more inviting and fun than it had at any time in the 500 years since Elizabeth Bell had been buried there. For almost the entire hour that the hunt went on, everyone seemed to be having a good time. It was only in the final few minutes when one or two of the younger children came back crying that I started to think that perhaps the event might have been a mistake. But even these sobs were soon eased once the children were reunited with their parents, and as the event drew to a close, I was honestly ready to pronounce it a huge success. Until that was, one of the children cracked open their chocolate egg. At first the kid had just started to devour the broken pieces, never stopping to look at what might be inside the hollow shell. After a moment, however, I began to hear them sobbing. Inside at least 9 of the chocolate eggs that had been recovered on the egg hunt was a concealed prize that nobody had anticipated, for resting at the bottom, partially embedded in the chocolate of each, was a single human tooth. These odd relics, some still with the blood-caked jelly of pulp and root still attached, had not been dug up, kicked accidentally with the end of a shoe, or disturbed by children searching too enthusiastically, but rather seemed to have had been placed carefully and purposely inside the oval of the chocolate eggs, as if they had been inserted when the things were made. Naturally, the parents were horrified, and many turned their eyes on me, not only as the organizer of the event and the newcomer in town, but as the one who had sourced these awful delights for the children. As I began to apologize, protesting that there was no way I could have known about this, the younger children again began to cry, each of them wailing, more instantly now as they tugged on their mother's skirts, that it was the lady, Mummy, the one with the black mouth. I will happily admit that hearing that I felt my blood run cold. "What lady?" I heard myself asking, my voice sounding almost as desperate as the child. "The old lady, the one in the trees. Her mouth was... it was all black and empty and dark. Mummy, I want to go home." That the day was not a success would be something of an understatement. In the weeks that followed, I thought long and hard about what had occurred, trying my best to explain it away. Perhaps, I thought, some disgruntled parishioner, unhappy that I had changed the location or ignored local folklore, had taken it upon themselves to leave the sinister surprises. Perhaps it was some disturbed individual at the factory of the company that produced the eggs. Possibilities and scenarios whirled in my head until, around a month after Easter, I was visited by the mother of one of the children who had found the teeth. She explained that the child had been sick ever since, that she was currently in the hospital suffering from some unidentified ailment, and that in an awful coincidence, all 8 of the other children who had found a tooth in their eggs were currently in a similar state. I was naturally horrified. She added that in the weeks since Easter, the teeth, which she had kept in a small glass jar, had begun to change. Though unattached to anything, and made up of enamel and dentine that should have been capable of remaining undamaged and unweathered for centuries, all 9 of the teeth had begun almost at once to blacken and rot, slowly decaying before their very eyes, even as their child withered and faded in their hospital beds. What this mother wanted to know, however, was not whether there was some supernatural cause for her child's ailment, but whether or not, in the eyes of the church, it would be a sin for her to rebury the teeth, placing them back in the soil of the woods in the hope that doing so would end their children's ailments and act, in some unknown way, as an apology to whoever or whatever was causing the illness in the first place. I was lost for words, trying, almost in a state of shock, to reason what the church's position on such an act might be. Was it witchcraft? Did it constitute a deal with some force outside of the holy and sanctioned? Was it, in essence, some form of pact? In the end, I decided not to speak for the church, but instead to answer only as myself. To that end, I asked that the teeth be returned not to the wood, but to me directly, a request that the mother willingly obliged. Later that night, I went up to Acres Wood, and without a second thought as to what the church's ruling on such matters might be, personally and quietly reburied them before saying a short blessing over the patch where the earth had been disturbed. A month later, having asked for reassignment, I left the parish forever. Before leaving, however, I was reassured to hear that every one of the children affected by the illness had made a full recovery. I was less reassured a month later when a congregation member in my new parish, upon hearing where I had come from, happened to mention almost as a joke how that village was the one haunted by a witch, especially when he added the detail that before she was executed, Elizabeth Bell had confessed fully to having made a deal with the devil. She made this confession after having been publicly tortured in the village square on Easter Sunday, a process that involved her having every one of her teeth pulled out with pliers